Greetings and salutations folks, and welcome once again as always to another helping of Mr H's Hot Pot. Today's little adventure brings me to the Mayanesque ruins of Aspull Pumping Pit, which lies in a little wooded area amidst the farmers' fields of the rural village of Aspull, which isn't too far away from the town of Wigan and sort of lies right on the border between the edge of the Wigan borough and the edge of the Bolton borough. Now today, all that remains of Aspull Pumping Pit are these huge, massive, thick walls that have been built from stone and brickwork that are behind me. But what we'll do today is we'll take a little look at what remains of this once magnificent industrial beast. Now unfortunately, there are no period photographs of this area when it was actually working and in operation. However, what we do have is ordnance survey maps from the time, and we have some drawings that was reimagined and thought up from memory from an engineer who used to work here called Thomas Derbyshire. So I'll be referencing both of those throughout this video. So without further ado folks, let's take a little look at the ruins and remnants of Aspull Pumping Pit. Okay folks, so I'm going to begin our little tour of Aspull Pumping Pit with the shaft itself, which lies just over that little wall there. And in a moment I'm going to step over that wall, lift the inspection cover and hopefully get to see down the shaft and see what remains down there. But before I do, I'd just like to give you a little bit of history of this site. Now work began here with the sinking of this shaft in 1871 by the Wigan Coal Iron Company, and they decided to build a pumping pit in this area to alleviate the problem of flooding in their mines that was being worked in and around this area. At the time, the Wigan Coal Iron Company were working the Cannel seam in this area, and they had the problem of flooding. Now they did set up various little setups to try and get rid of the water, but it was decided that a permanent solution was sought after, and they decided to build a huge pumping pit at this point and divert all the water from all the local mines that they owned to this point, and they would draw up the water from the bowels of the earth and reutilise all that water in various aspects of the mining industry, such as steam locomotives and various boilers, as apparently the water from the Cannel seam was very clean. Because of the coal being very hard, the water was pretty clean. Probably not clean enough to drink or have a bath in, but it could certainly be used in boilers and other aspects such as coal washing and things like that. Now there was also rather shrewd, the Wigan Coal and Iron Company, because they knew that not only they was working the Cannel seam in this area, there was also various independent companies working it, and they wasn't big enough to build a huge Goliath of a pumping pit like this. So what the Wigan Coal and Iron Company did, they approached those smaller mine operators and said, if you wish, you can drive a roadway from your mine to our pumping pit and we'll draw the water off for you, for an annual fee of course. Unfortunately, that meant that when this pumping pit closed in 1932, it left those mine owners with the problem of flooding again. And apparently when this pumping pit did close, one or two of those mines did have to close shortly afterwards, as they had no way of getting rid of their water. Anyway, let's take a look at the shaft itself. So there's the inspection cover that I'm going to be lifting in a moment, and hopefully with a bit of luck we'll be able to send the camera down and be able to see what remnants are down there. Apparently this shaft is 21 feet in diameter, so it's a pretty substantial shaft really. Now what would have happened in this area, because this is the business end of Aspull Pumping Pit, originally in those slots in the stonework there's three of them, two to each side and one in front of you, you would have had three huge bull ram pumps which would have dangled over the shaft and would have drawn the water up from the bowels of the earth. Now, by all accounts, this was a pretty noisy place to work back in the day, because not only did these walls have to be substantial to carry the weight of those ram pumps, and as you can see there's still remnants of ironwork and various little things in that stonework that would have carried various things at one point in time. It would also had to deal with the vibration of these huge pumps crashing down into the earth, because they wouldn't have been working in tandem. What you would have had is they would have been crashing at various intervals. Now as I said, it was a very noisy area to work in, and it's best described by an engineer who used to work here called Ernest Holt, who stated that these great pumping engines made a big noise when working. They would snort and groan and shake everything when the pistons came to the end of their stroke. So I should imagine that tinnitus was also a big problem if you worked at this pumping pit back in the day, and I'm sure many people went to the graves with that old ringing in their ears that comes from working in a noisy industry. Anyway, I'm going to step over that wall now, and we're going to take a look, with a bit of luck, down the shaft and see what remains in there. Well, I've lifted the inspection cover from the top of this shaft, and the purpose of this hole now that you can see in front of you is to allow engineers from the Coal Authority to come here, lift the inspection cover as I've done, and send a camera down so that they can inspect the walls of the shaft and things like that to ensure that it's still safe. Now, I hope it is in good condition, because if it's not, I'm stood right above this shaft. Now, what I'm going to do to give us an idea of how deep this shaft is, I'm going to drop a brick down there in a moment, and we'll see just how long it takes before it hits the bottom of the shaft, and that'll give us an indication of how deep this is. So here goes. And it's just hit the bottom of the shaft there. That roughly takes about 3 seconds to fall from where I'm stood at the moment right to the bottom of that shaft, and it does sound pretty dry down there. It doesn't sound like there's any water down there. So how they've stopped water coming from the workings from the various mines to this point to continue to flood, who knows. Anyway, I'm now going to send the camera down there, and hopefully I won't drop it, and we'll take a look at what it looks like inside there. So with that inspection plate placed back over that hole and the shaft safely sealed once again, we can now take a closer look at these slots where the balance beams to the pumping engines would have sat back in the day. And you can actually see where there's bolts still in the stonework from that ironwork from back in the 1800s. Little holes in the stonework that would have carried something at one time. Ironwork there that would have supported something. And it's amazing to think that this is still here, and when I lift my camera up and I'm at full stretch here, you can actually see just how tall this stonework is. And it is very impressive, this structure. Now these little brick walls here are sort of sealing these slots. I don't think those are original to this structure. What I think those was built for was to stop anyone falling down this shaft, and probably back in the day, all where I'm currently stood was open. The shaft was simply left open. Now I do know in the 1970s that a lot of Aspullites, a lot of local kids, came and played in this area. Now whether or not at that point it was decided to seal the shaft properly rather than leave it open or not, who knows. But anyway, that was the shaft to Aspull Pumping Pit. So as we leave the shaft behind and I slowly make my way around Aspull Pumping Pit, I'm going to start referring now to Thomas Derbyshire's drawings of the pumping pit, which he conjured up from his own memory of the days when he worked here. And that'll give you some perspective and some idea of what this particular area looked like back in the day. So I'll put that in for you now. And as you can see from those drawings that were conjured up from the memories of Thomas Derbyshire, an engineer who used to work at Aspull Pumping Pit, the structure that you can currently see behind me looks nothing like it did back in the day when this was in full glory. Now these buildings that the Victorians used to build were always very ornate, and I'm sure that the pump house back in the day looked rather impressive, and it's amazing to think that there's no period photographs of this area back in the day, because I'm sure that it used to dominate the skyline. Now my personal theory is that when they started building Aspull Pumping Pit, they would have built this area that you can currently see behind me, what I will refer to as the stump. That would have supported all the ironwork and all the pumping gubbins, and then they would have built the pump house around it. And then when they decided that it was no longer in use and they wanted to demolish it, they would have simply done it in reverse. They would have demolished the pump house, salvaged any fancy cornerstones and things like that and taken them away from this site. Then they would have removed the ironwork. And probably this stump just proved too difficult to demolish, and that's why it's still here. But it leaves many features, and it does make you wonder what many of these features were for back in the day. Take these little stone holes in the brickwork there. Those run through to those slots that I showed you earlier. And those, who knows what they were for? Did they carry steam pipes? Did they carry water? Were they crawlways to be able to get in so that they could maintain the pumps? Who knows? It's just amazing to think that these things are still here. Now it does look like there's a bit of original woodwork there up at the top, as you can just see above that square opening. Now one theory that I have, that piece of timber that's been built into the fabric of Aspull Pumping Pit walls could have been used for back in the day, is that according to Thomas Derbyshire's drawings, there used to be a wooden headgear rising above the actual shaft of Aspull Pumping Pit, and that would have contained a 25-foot diameter flywheel working on a single pulley running down into the shaft. There is a corresponding piece of timber on the other side of the shaft, but it's not in as good condition as that, and that's what I think that timber could have been part of. it could have been part of that wooden headgear. Sadly, we don't have any photographs, so we don't know, we're just left to our imaginations. But I'm going to make my way further round now, and we'll be able to see some of the brickwork that matches up to Thomas Derbyshire's original drawings. And this is one of those stone slots that I'm going to make my way down now, where the balance beams from those great pumps that would have worked the shaft, which is just at the end there, on the other side of that wall. This is where one of them would have sat. And it just gives you some scale of the size of the pumps that worked this pumping pit, and there was 3 of them. And probably in what was a maintenance tunnel, because there is a little bit of archway here, or the remains of an arch. And this does appear on Tom Derbyshire's drawings, which I'll refer back to for you now. And this is all that remains of that archway today. Back in the day, it would have run across that walkway that I've just been in, over to the other side, and if I can get my camera low enough, it would have joined on that side there at that point. Now it seems that over time various parts of this structure have fallen away, and various bits seem to have just been randomly chiselled out. My theory on this is that at the time, and according to Thomas Derbyshire's drawings, there would have been expensive cornerstones built into this structure, and probably the salvage crews, when they was demolishing this structure, salvaged those and took them away. What we're now looking at here is what would have been the front of Aspull Pumping Pit, and it's where the largest of those pumping engines would have been housed. So I'm going to take a walk over there in a moment, and we'll see what remains of that area, shall we? Now, as I was making my way around the front of Aspull Pumping Pit, out the corner of my eye, in the woods, hidden, I've noticed this curious little structure. I've no idea what this could have possibly been. It's quite a distance away from the actual pumping pit structure. So what we'll do, we'll go over, take a look at it, and see if we can work out what this possibly would have been back in the day. Well, look, potters, whatever this was used for back in the day, it couldn't have been very big, as you can see. There's not really a lot of space inside there. It's just about wide enough for a man to stand inside. There is an entranceway to it, as you can see, just there. But it doesn't appear that there's been any door frame attached to that at any point. So whatever was kept in here didn't need to be locked up. Now, if you notice, the ground sort of slopes away down to that back wall. And my guess is that probably there was steps underneath there, and if you was to excavate all that rubble out, you would probably find some steps, and that probably leads to some subterranean tunnels that lead underneath the actual pumping pit structure that have been lost to time. However, I could be wrong, so as always, please leave your thoughts below as to what you think this structure could have been back in the day. Right then, we'll move on now to the actual front of the pumping pit. I'm now around what would have once been the front of Aspull Pumping Pit, and I'm stood on the ruins of what would have been the part that housed pump number 3, which was the largest of the 3 ram pumps that worked this pit. And when I whip the camera around in a moment, you'll be able to see just how large this part of the pump house actually was, and it'll give you some idea of just how large that engine was that worked this part of the pumping pit. This is the one that could raise 660 gallons per minute from the bowels of the earth. So I'll whip the camera around for you now, and we'll take a closer look at this part of the ruins, and then we'll make our way around to the other side. And today, this is all that remains of this part of the pump house that would have housed pump number 3, and the largest of these ram pumps that was situated at Aspull Pumping Pit. Now, there would have been an outrigger back in the day that would have stretched out here, and you can just see the remains of the brickwork there that piled up in front of you. and that would have housed another part of this huge pump. As I said, this was the one that could remove 660 gallons of water per minute from the pit at 4.5 strokes per minute. Now as we look back, just behind that tree there, there's another one of those square openings that stretch inside that slot there. Again, I'm just theorising that those were either crawlways so that they could get in and maintain those pumps, or they was there so that steam pipes could lead in and out of it. As I said, unfortunately we don't actually have any true technical drawings of this, so we don't know what they were for. Again, there's a little pillar there that would have been rather impressive back in the day because they're what they're known as bull-nose bricks, so that would have been an integral part. It's just a shame that there is no actual original drawings or photographs of this, because it really is impressive. Just looking at these ruins today, you can see that this was once an impressive structure. And as I said, they are very Mayanesque ruins really, especially with the stonework that's in them. Anyway, I'm now going to move the camera and we'll be able to see down that particular stone slot, and we'll be able to see if there's any remains of ironwork and things like that that would have been attached to the balance beam. So we'll do that now. So I'm now about to enter where back in the day the balance beam to pump number 3 would have been housed. I'm just going to slowly make my way in here, hot potters, because as you can probably see, there's quite a bit of moss on the ground there, and it looks like 1 or 2 people have gone skidding on this stonework who've been in here exploring recently. So I don't want to join their good company, so I'll slowly make my way in. And as you can see there in front of us, we have the edge of the shaft. That's the bit where the pump would have actually hung over the shaft. You can just see the bolts there that would have held the ironwork that would probably have stabilised the pump that ran down there. And it's amazing when you come to look at this structure, just the amount of work that would have gone into building this, and to say that it was built in 5 years is amazing really. You know, from scratch to getting it fully operational, it took them just 5 short years, and that's amazing really, especially when you come to look at the size of some of this stonework. You know, I'll just make my way through to one of those, what I say is either a crawlway or a, you know, it held steam pipes at one time, and you'll be able to see just how thick those stone blocks are. You know, you can see that they're rather substantial. And we'll just give you a quick view of what it would look like looking out towards the outrigger that once stood there where the engine part would have been housed. And that's the other side of that archway. There are still little bits of ironwork still in here that didn't get removed. You can just see here that there's something that would have held a cable or something back in the day. You know, and it's amazing to see these little remnants really of a time long since gone. Well, I'm slowly making my way around now to the other side of this structure, and the final side that we'll be taking a look at in a moment. But I just wanted to show you just how quickly nature reclaims areas such as these, as this now lies in a wooded area that can be seen from Google Earth amidst a number of farmers' fields. Now in front of you there, you can just see another one of those access points that would lead straight through these massively thick brick and stone walls into one of the chambers where one of the balancing beams would have been held back in the day. And that one's rather unusual insofar as it follows the contour of the walls. You can probably just make out there that that part of the wall is curved and the stonework follows that. So it would appear that not only did they have master bricklayers back in the day, they also had master stonemasons. Right then, I'm going to make my way around now to take a look at this final chamber that's just hidden behind this wall. Before we take a look at the final balance beam chamber of Aspull Pumping Pit, I just wanted to point out and show you a little feature on this brick wall here that probably many people who visit this area just walk past and don't even notice. Now, as you can probably see there on the camera, those bricks there, up to about that point there, are bull-nosed. After that, they're just normal standard bricks. The reason those are bull-nosed or rounded is so that the corner of the wall has been dulled. And the reason for that is where I'm currently stood would have originally been a footpath around these buildings. And it's very narrow here between what is the pump house to the pumping pit and the boiler house, which would have fed the pumping pit engines. So what you would have had is people coming round here, doing the job, carrying things, moving wheelbarrows, whatever it would have been, and it would be very easy for them to smash the shoulder into the wall. So they've rounded that to make it a little bit easier on the old shoulders. Obviously the ground level has risen over the years, but I should imagine that back in the day, you know, this would have been past head height. So that's an interesting little feature really, and a little bit of early health and safety in the Victorian era. Anyway, we'll move on now and we'll take a look at this final balance beam chamber. And as we head into this balance beam chamber, we can see straight away that it's constructed in exactly the same way as the other two that we've been in previously, with big stone blocks and heavy masonry supporting all the ironwork above that would have been needed to make these huge pumps work. Now I'm going to slowly make my way down this balance beam chamber because once again, as you can see, there's a bit of moss there and other trip hazards waiting to catch Mr. H out. With a bit of luck I'll get to the end without falling, and we can take a look at the area where the pump would have actually sat once again. Now we've got the edge of the pumping pit there which has been capped, and there's a little bit of a remnant of steel tubing there which runs down into it. Now whether or not that carried cables or something like that back in the day, who knows, but today it's got a little tree growing out of it. I wonder how deep those roots go. Now you can see on the walls here, you can see where the pump would have been attached. You can see the bolts protruding out of the wall, and you can see where the stonework has actually worn away. And that's probably been due to all the vibration that these huge pumps made. It's slowly worn the sandstone away, leaving a bit of a groove that's been cut into the stonework. You can also see the wall at the end where they've bricked it up, presumably to stop anyone falling into the shaft. And you can see the other side of one of these spaces, you know, these stone openings that lead through these huge thick walls into these balance beam chambers. Now again, I've no idea whether those are crawl spaces or whether they was to house steam pipes or something like that. Please leave your comments below and your thoughts on that, as I would be interested to get your thoughts on this, and especially anybody who's more mining minded than I am. Now you can see how they used to attach these bolts back in the day. You know, they would fill them round with lead, and that is a really old way of doing it. That's the old Victorian style of setting bolts, anchor bolts, into stonework. I'm now going to slowly make my way out of here again. Well, I've now scrambled up one of the walls of Aspull Pumping Pit like a superhero or a fool, whatever your outlook is on that. I am in here on my own today, so I'll have to say that if something was to happen to me here, I'd be in stum, and I'm sure Mrs H will berate me for doing this. But I wanted to take a closer look at the stone blocks that sit at the top of each and every one of these balance beam chambers, because those stone slots that you can see cut into them are quite important, because those would have held the whole weight of the pumps that worked this pumping pit. They was bolted to the sides of the walls, but that is where the main weight would have been held, so it's quite interesting to get a closer look at them and see the work and the craftsmanship that would have gone into chiselling those stone slots out by the stonemasons back in the day. Anyway, I'm going to try and negotiate this wall and climb back down. Now as I make my way out of that balance beam chamber, we come to a rather curious little structure that doesn't appear to have been built at the same time as the rest of these ruins. And what gives the game away for me, Hot Potters, that the ruins of this wall that you can see in front of you was added much later, is that straight joint there. that I'm pointing at. If you take a closer look at that, you'll notice that not only is it a straight joint, but it's also built out of course with the original brickwork. So that tells me that this was added a little bit later. And the reason I think that they added a building to this part of the pumping pit was to act as a transformer house. We do know in 1908 that electric pumps were installed further down in the workings, the idea being to draw the water from the mans that were a fair distance away from this pumping pit, bring it here to this catchment area so that it could be drawn up out of the earth, the same as any other water from the Cannel seam. And the power was being fed from a substation over in New Springs at the Kirkless Ironworks, and it was brought here via overhead poles, brought to a transformer house on this site, and then stepped down to 400, 440 volts, and then sent down via cables to the pumps in the workings down below. And I think that that is the original transformer house. And this is just another view of the outside of that building that I believe was added after Aspull Pumping Pit was originally constructed, and it served as a transformer house back in the day. Now, as you can see over there on the right hand corner of your screen, you can see where the brickwork meets the original brickwork of Aspull Pumping Pit, and you can see that it's not been keyed in at all there. It's just been butted up with sand and cement to the original brickwork. So that does give the game away that this was added a little bit later. Now, as I make my way over, you can probably see, coming into the centre of your screen, a couple of bullnose bricks. Those would have served as a window opening, I think, back in the day. Anyway, we're now going to leave the main construction of Aspull Pumping Pit, and we're going to make our way over into the woods and search out the remnants and remains of the boiler house and the boiler plant that would have fed Aspull Pumping Pit. So I'm going to move now on the map, and I'm going to move over to where I believe that the boiler house and all that area used to stand. Okay folks, well I've now moved away from the main structure of Aspull Pumping Pit, and I've moved over to what I believe is the boiler plant of Aspull Pumping Pit. Now, we do know that there was 5 large Lancashire boilers on site, and those would have fed those 3 massive pumps that we've taken a look at today. Now, the water that was drawn up from Aspull Pumping Pit was used in these very boilers, and they would have been housed in various buildings where I'm now currently stood. Sadly, all that stands today is this one wall behind me and these steps that look a little bit worn on the top step. And it's a shame that these walls no longer stand, but we can see the footings and we can see the rubble and remnants from the boiler plant. Now, there was a chimney on site, and that stayed up until 1955 when they finally decided to demolish it. It would have probably been demolished earlier if it hadn't been for the Second World War. Anyway, I'm going to whip the camera around now, and I'm going to do a bit of a walk, and we'll see what little remnants of brickwork and things like that are still visible today. Now, sadly, all that remains of the boiler plant to Aspull Pumping Pit today is this little bit of wall here that you can see in front of you. This set of stone steps, which, judging from the treads of those stone steps, they saw quite a bit of footfall back in the day, and this might have been a well-used entrance into these structures. And there's a little bit of wall just over the other side, which we'll take a look at in a moment, but it's mainly fallen masonry and rubble that's been left in this area. So we'll take a closer look at this building here at the side of me and hazard what it may have been back in the day. It's not really a very big building when you come to look at it. Just take a look at the foundations though. It doesn't appear to be very big. There's a huge stone slab here, which I should have imagined back in the day that was the entrance into this building. And then you've got little holes in the rear wall there, which would have probably seen steam pipes back in the day. Now, as I said, this structure did have a chimney, and that chimney stayed up until 1955 when it was decided it needed to be demolished. Now, how tall the chimney was and the shape of the chimney has been lost to history, sadly. Thomas Derbyshire didn't do any drawings and technical drawings of the boiler side of Aspull Pumping Pit. He only did the actual pumping pit, but From what I've seen on the Ordnance Survey maps, the chimney was located towards the rear of the boiler plant area. And when I've been taking a little look in here, I've noticed there's the remains of these two brick buttresses. They're very close together, and they are, if you look at them closely enough, in a bit of a circular formation. Now, whether or not there was others, and the remains of others are beneath the undergrowth, who knows? But I would hazard a guess that those brick buttresses formed part of the supports to the chimney that used to stand here and took away all the smoke from the coal that was being burned here to create steam to work those pumps in the pumping pit. Now, the other wall is located further back in this woods, so I'm going to shut off the camera now and join me in a moment when we get to it. And this is the only other little bit of wall that remains standing from the boiler plant to Aspull Pumping Pit. Large chunk of fallen masonry there. And then as we make our way through here, you can see the remains of another wall that would have stood here at one time. And you can see just how close the boiler plant came to the actual pumping pit there. That's a little channel there, and that's where those bull-nose bricks are that I showed you earlier to spur people's shoulders, and you can just see how narrow that would have been there between those two walls. Right then, I'm going to whip the camera around now, and then we'll make our way over to another structure that's hidden in these woods. Well, that was a quick little look at the boiler plant area of Aspull Pumping Pit. Now, sadly, not a lot remains of this area, and it's such a shame really, because judging from the Ordnance Survey maps that I've studied from back in the day, it looks like this area would have been quite sizable that I'm currently studying. By far the juiciest and ripest apple in the orchard is the pumping pit itself. But before we wrap this video up, I'm going to take a look at the remains of one last little structure that's hidden in this wooded area. And we're going to take a look at a little surprise feature that many people walk past who come and visit Aspull Pumping Pit. So I'm going to head over there now. Well, I've now made my way over to the final structure that we're going to be taking a look at today here at Aspull Pumping Pit. And unfortunately, once again, the Ordnance Survey maps are giving away very little detail and very little clue as to what this structure behind me could have possibly been back in the day. Now, what I personally found fascinating about this particular structure is not only what it could have been back in the day and the sheer size of those stone blocks that you can see behind me, it's the fact that many of those stone blocks have a Roman numeral chiselled into the face, which would indicate that this structure would have had to have been built in sequence and was probably constructed elsewhere, then deconstructed and rebuilt here. So what I think we'll do is, I think we'll whip the camera around, I'll take a walk around this particular structure now for you, and we'll theorise together what it could have possibly been back in the day. So here we have the remains and remnants of the final structure that we're going to be taking a look at here at Aspull Pumping Pit today. Now, as you can see from the sheer size of a number of those stone blocks that this has been constructed out of, whatever would have been here back in the day would have been rather large and substantial, and it would have probably been some weight as well, judging from the size of those stone blocks. Now, what I find particularly fascinating is on this particular wall here, because each and every one of these stone blocks has a Roman numeral carved into it. And like I said previously, that would suggest that this has been constructed elsewhere, taken apart, brought to this spot and reconstructed here exactly. Now, there is a rumour that the first pump that was installed here at Aspull Pumping Pit was actually second hand and came from another pit. So I do wonder if this structure was part of that first pump and it was elsewhere at one time. Now, this rather large stone here with the half moon carved out of it, I have seen that before over at Taylor Pit, which I took a look at a while ago with Mrs H. And this has been deliberately chiselled out. Well, it's two parts actually, and it's been chiselled out there for something to sit on. You know, which to me that looks like it's been something like a big axle or something that's gone through, so there would have probably been another one of these on the other side, and a wheel of some description would have sat in here. Now whether or not that was to pit head gears, you know, or whether or not it was a little way of forming power for in the mines, who knows? Who knows, but certainly interesting. Now, like I say, I have seen that before, so I should imagine that whatever that was at Taylor Pit, this particular structure served the same purpose. And this is what this structure would have looked like from this side. You can just make out the beginning of an archway there, and some bull-nosed bricks which would indicate either a doorway or a window opening. Would have been a brick wall that would have run along the back there, and then you can just make out the back of those stones that I've just shown you with all the Roman numerals in them. And just through the trees there, from this angle, you can make out that there's another narrow trench in this stonework and the remains of this particular structure. Now that trench is narrower than the one that I was studying with all the Roman numerals carved into the face of the stonework. My guess is that at some point in time this particular structure would have held a flywheel, probably either in that trench or the one that I was studying previously, and the brick portion to this structure would have housed the engine that ran that flywheel. And this is a view of what this structure looks like from up above. Once again, hot potters, I've rather foolishly scrambled up these walls to bring you this perspective. But from up here, you can see all the various bolts that run through these huge stone blocks to connect them all together, and all the sockets that have been chiselled out of the stonework to house all the equipment that would have been here back in the day. And down there's the trench where I was stood with all the Roman numerals. And the more and more I look at this, the more and more I'm convinced that this once housed a huge flywheel of some description, especially with that socket there that's been chiselled out with the half moon in it. And down below here is that narrow trench that we was looking at just a short while ago. And this too has all kinds of various sockets chiselled into the stonework. And I've seen this structure in various forms in all the mining ruins that I've been and visited, so I should imagine that whatever this is, it's an integral part of the mining industry. Maybe it was to supply air down into the shaft or something like that, who knows. Anyway, I'm going to jump across to this other stone block here with my cat-like reflexes and hopefully not fall down that trench, and join me again when I'm back down on the ground and on terra firma. Well, hot potters, I've made it back to the ground safe and sound, you'll be pleased to hear. Now, before we wrap this video up, I want to take a quick little look at one last feature of Aspull Pumping Pit that is not too far away from the structure that we've just been looking at. And it's one feature that I'm sure many people who visit this particular area walk past and don't even know that it's there. And it's hidden just behind that tree there. So we'll take a look at that now, and then we'll wrap this video up. And this is what I wanted to show you, folks, before I wrap this video up. Now, whilst it doesn't look much and just looks a pile of barbed wire, what you can actually see behind it is the remains and the walls of a well that's actually marked on the Ordnance Survey map from this period when Aspull Pumping Pit was in operation. And it's literally just a few steps away from the remains of the structure that we've been taking a look at earlier. Now, I should imagine that the farmer who owns the fields around here has placed that barbed wire around this to stop any livestock falling in that. And whilst I should imagine quite a bit of rubble from Aspull Pumping Pit found its way down into that well, I wouldn't like to venture in there. Now, I'm sure that many people who visit this site walk past this old well and don't even know it's here, as I've visited a number of urban exploration sites while I was doing a bit of research for this video, and none of them have featured this well. I'm the one who's actually found it and matched it up to the map, so I'm pretty pleased about that I've uncovered an original feature of Aspull Pumping Pit that hasn't been documented before. Anyway, I'm now going to whip the camera around and we'll wrap this video up. Well folks, that'll just about do it for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's comprehensive look at Aspull Pumping Pit and the history surrounding this site. I know that many of you out there have requested that I come here and document this particular pumping pit. Gareth Purr, you're one of those. You've been waiting a long time for this particular video. I hope that I've done it justice. Now, I'll be honest with you, I came here with the full intentions of just doing a quick 10-minute, 15-minute video, my usual style, but when I got here I found out that there was so much here to document that I've been here for hours. Now, if you want to visit this site yourself, which I do highly recommend, just be mindful that whilst the Coal Authority own this particular area that I'm studying, you do have to cross private land and farmers' fields in order to get here. Now, by all accounts, the farmer is rather relaxed and rather amiable. He's not one of these farmer perma-types that as soon as he sees someone horn on the horizon, he comes marching out with a shotgun. But just remember that he doesn't want things like crops being trampled or fences broken in order to get in here. Anyway, that said, I'm going to now leave. I'm going to get back home and edit up all this footage that I've been doing today, ready for your edification. So folks, until the next time, from myself, Mr H, as always, it is bye-bye for now.